You're scrolling through your phone at 1 p.m. Another disaster, another fundraiser, another heartbreaking story with a face you'll forget by morning. You feel something stir in your chest, something that resembles caring, and your thumb hovers over the heart icon. You press it. The heart fills with color. You keep scrolling. 3 posts down, someone is sharing their trauma, raw, unfiltered, the kind of pain that should warrant silence, or at least a conversation in person. But here it is, formatted with paragraph breaks and a vulnerable selfie. You feel that familiar pull, the weight of witnessing. You type out a comment, sending love. You're so brave. Here if you need me. You hit send and feel a small glow of goodness. You've helped. You've shown you care. But have you? Later you can't sleep. Not because you're thinking about the disaster or the trauma or the suffering you witnessed. You're not thinking about them at all. You're thinking about how tired you feel, how heavy everything is, how you can't seem to care the way you think you should. There's a numbness spreading inside you, disguised as empathy, and you're starting to suspect that something about the way you connect to other people's pain has fundamentally changed. You're experiencing what nobody wants to talk about, the dark side of digital empathy. We've built a world where suffering is currency and compassion is content, where pain is broadcast and empathy is performed. And somewhere in the translation from human to digital, from presence to pixels, empathy has transformed into something we don't quite recognize anymore. Something that looks like caring but feels like exhaustion. Something that appears noble but leaves us emptier than before. This is not a story about apathy. It's about something far more insidious. It's about what happens when empathy becomes infinite, instant, and utterly disconnected from action. The phenomenon starts innocently enough. Social media promised connection. It delivered access. Suddenly, we weren't just aware of the suffering in our immediate circle. We were confronted with the pain of strangers across the world, updated in real time, algorithmically curated to maximize engagement. Every scroll brought a new crisis. Every refresh revealed another wound, and we responded the way we were taught to respond, with empathy, with hearts and prayers and solidarity. We changed our profile pictures. We shared the posts. We bore witness to atrocities from our couches, tragedies from our lunch breaks, grief from our commutes. We told ourselves we were spreading awareness, being good people, staying informed. But empathy, it turns out, was never designed to scale. Dr. Paul Bloom, in his work on empathy, draws a crucial distinction that unravels our digital compassion. He separates empathy, the vicarious experiencing of another's emotions, from compassion, the concern for another's well-being coupled with action. Empathy makes you feel what they feel. Compassion makes you want to help. In physical spaces, these often blur together naturally. You see your friend crying, you feel their sadness, you put your arm around them. The feeling and the action are linked. But online, the empathy is triggered constantly while the action is impossible or abstracted into meaninglessness. You feel the pain of 1,000 strangers, and the only available response is a button, a share, a comment that evaporates into the void. This creates a peculiar kind of emotional labor. You're expending real psychological energy, experiencing genuine emotional responses, but directing them into a vacuum. It's empathy as performance art. The feeling is real, the impact is not, and your nervous system doesn't know the difference. Psychologists call it compassion fatigue, but that term, borrowed from healthcare and humanitarian workers, doesn't quite capture what's happening to us. Those professionals experience fatigue from genuine, sustained helping. What we're experiencing is fatigue from the simulation of helping, from the endless emotional triggering without resolution, from caring constantly, without the ability to complete the empathetic circuit through meaningful action. It's empathy without object permanence. The suffering disappears the moment you scroll past, but your body has already released the cortisol, activated the stress response, fired up the mirror neurons. You've absorbed the trauma secondhand and then moved on to the next one before processing the first. Your empathy becomes a leaky faucet, constantly dripping, never turned off, slowly flooding your psychological basement. The dark irony is that this constant exposure doesn't make us more empathetic, it makes us less. You start to notice the mechanisms of your own emotional self-preservation kicking in. You become desensitized. The first time you saw images of disaster, you felt shattered. The 100th time, you feel a vague sadness. The 1,000th time, you feel irritation at the interruption of your feed. This isn't cruelty, it's adaptation. Your psyche building walls because it has to, because no human consciousness was meant to hold this much secondhand suffering. But here's where it gets truly dark. Even as you're numbing, you're also performing empathy more than ever. Because digital spaces don't reward genuine emotional processing. They reward visible emotional labor. The performance of caring. You learn the language. This is devastating. I have no words. My heart breaks. You learn which emoji conveys sufficient gravity. You learn that sharing the post demonstrates more investment than just liking it. You learn that adding personal commentary signals deeper engagement. None of this is insincere exactly, but it's also not quite real. It's empathy as social currency. And like any currency, it can be earned, displayed, and spent strategically. Watch what happens when tragedy strikes and the posts flood in. There's almost a competition to be the most affected, the most aware, the most compassionate. People share trauma that isn't theirs to share, pain that isn't theirs to broadcast, using other people's suffering as a vehicle for their own moral presentation. Look how much I care. Look how deeply I feel. Look what a good person I am. This is where digital empathy curdles into something troubling. Empathy, in its truest form, is other-directed. It's about understanding and alleviating someone else's pain. But performative empathy is self-directed. It's about managing your own image, soothing your own conscience, performing your own goodness for an audience. The person suffering becomes a prop in your morality play. You see this most clearly in how quickly the empathy moves on. A crisis dominates the feed for days, everyone posting their heartbreak and solidarity, and then it vanishes. Not because the crisis ended, but because the algorithm moved on. Because the audience got bored. Because new suffering emerged to replace the old. The people still living that reality are left behind, but the empathizers have already transferred their public compassion to the next trending tragedy. There's a term in philosophy called moral licensing, where performing a good act gives people unconscious permission to act less morally afterward. Digital empathy operates similarly. You've posted about the crisis. You've demonstrated your values. You've done your part. The performance of caring becomes a substitute for actual caring, and you feel virtuous without having changed anything at all. Meanwhile, the empathy you might have reserved for the people physically around you is depleted. You've spent your emotional energy on strangers you'll never meet, problems you cannot solve, and suffering you cannot ease. When your partner needs support or your friend needs presence, you have nothing left. You've given it all to the void, and the void has given nothing back. This is the hidden cost. Every moment of digital empathy is energy not spent on embodied empathy. Every emotional response to distant suffering is capacity unavailable for proximate connection. You're so busy feeling for everyone that you become unavailable to anyone, and beneath it all runs a current of something even more uncomfortable. If we're honest, truly honest, some of digital empathy isn't empathy at all. It's something darker. It's voyeurism wearing empathy's mask. There's a reason the most traumatic posts get the most engagement. There's a reason we scroll through disasters like we're rubbernecking a car accident. Human suffering, at a safe distance, is compelling. It makes us feel something in lives that often feel numb. It provides drama and stakes and emotional intensity without requiring us to actually be in danger. We consume other people's pain like entertainment, and then dress it up as compassion to make it acceptable. We tell ourselves we're bearing witness, but we're often just spectating. The line between empathy and consumption blurs until we can't tell the difference anymore. Social media platforms understand this better than we do. They've gamified empathy. They've discovered that content triggering empathetic responses drives engagement, so they feed it to us constantly. The algorithm doesn't care if you're moved to action. It cares if you're moved to stay. And empathy, that beautiful human capacity for connection, has been reverse engineered into an attention trap. You feel bad, so you engage. You engage, so you see more things that make you feel bad. You feel worse, so you perform empathy to feel better. The performance drives more content. The cycle continues. Your empathy becomes the product, and you're both the consumer and the consumed. This is what makes modern digital empathy so quietly devastating. It's taken something sacred, our ability to feel with and for each other, and turned it into content, into performance, into a resource that can be extracted and monetized. And in the process, it's breaking something essential in how we relate to suffering, both others and our own. The exhaustion you feel isn't weakness. It's your psyche recognizing that something is wrong, that the empathy you're performing doesn't connect to anything real, that you're bleeding emotional energy into a system designed to take it and give nothing back. So what do we do with this? How do we navigate a world that demands infinite empathy while offering finite capacity? The answer isn't to stop caring. It's to care differently, more selectively, more embodied, more connected to action. It starts with recognizing that you cannot empathize with everyone. This isn't cruelty. It's mathematics. Your empathy is a limited resource, and like any resource, how you allocate it matters. Spending it all on strangers you cannot help leaves nothing for the people you can actually impact. This means making difficult choices. It means scrolling past some suffering. It means not performing grief for every tragedy. It means accepting that you cannot bear witness to everything and stay whole. It feels wrong at first, this deliberate limiting of empathy. It feels selfish, but it's actually the opposite. It's preserving your capacity to care in ways that matter. True empathy requires proximity, not always physical, but psychological. It requires actually knowing someone, understanding their context, being present to their experience beyond a caption. It requires the possibility of action, of mutual relationship, of impact. Without these, what you're experiencing isn't empathy. It's just emotional contagion. Ask yourself, who is actually in your circle of influence? Whose suffering can you actually help alleviate? Where can your empathy translate into meaningful action rather than just meaningful feeling? These are your empathy priorities. These are where your limited compassion should flow, not because other suffering doesn't matter, but because your empathy only matters when it connects to something real. This also means changing your relationship with digital suffering. Curate your feeds with the same care you curate your inner circle. Unfollow accounts that traffic in trauma. Mute keywords that trigger compassion you cannot act on. Set boundaries around when and how you engage with difficult content. Your empathy is yours to protect. When you do engage, do it with intention. Don't just react. Consider whether your response serves the person suffering or just serves your need to be seen as caring. If you're moved to help, find concrete action. Donate if you can. Volunteer if it's possible. Offer specific support to specific people. And if you can't do any of that, it's okay to simply acknowledge the suffering privately and move on. The performance of empathy helps no one. The practice of empathy, bounded and intentional, can change everything. We also need to rebuild embodied empathy. Real, physical, in-person connection with actual humans in your actual life. The kind of empathy that results in showing up, making soup when someone is sick, sitting with someone while they cry, helping a neighbor carry groceries. Small, concrete, undocumented acts of care that require presence instead of performance. This kind of empathy doesn't scale, and that's exactly the point. It's empathy that knows its limits, that values depth over breadth, that chooses effectiveness over visibility. It doesn't feel as impressive as caring about global crises, but it's infinitely more real. And finally, we need to extend some of that preserved empathy to ourselves, to recognize that the exhaustion, the numbness, the guilt about not caring enough, these are symptoms of a system that was never designed for human flourishing. You're not broken for being overwhelmed. You're responding appropriately to an inappropriate demand. Give yourself permission to not feel everything, to not know about everything, to not perform care for an audience. Your worth isn't measured in how much suffering you can witness or how publicly you can grieve. The dark side of digital empathy isn't that we're becoming heartless. It's that we're being asked to have infinite hearts in a finite body, and we're breaking under the weight of it. The solution isn't to feel more, it's to feel more carefully, more selectively, more connected to the possibility of actual human impact. Empathy was always meant to be a bridge between one person and another, a recognition of shared humanity that inspires connection and action. What it's become online is a broadcast signal, sent everywhere and nowhere, received by everyone and no one, producing feeling without meaning and exhaustion without purpose. You can choose differently. You can protect your empathy like the precious resource it is. You can direct it toward people and places where it matters. You can let yourself care deeply about a few things rather than superficially about everything. You can stop performing and start practicing. This won't make you less compassionate. It will make your compassion count. Because at the end of your life, you won't be measured by how many tragedies you acknowledged or how many solidarity posts you shared. You'll be measured by the actual people you actually helped, the real hands you held, the genuine presence you offered, the difference you made in the lives close enough to touch. That's where empathy lives, not in the infinite scroll, but in the finite, sacred space between two people who see each other clearly. And that's the only place it's ever truly mattered. Your empathy is not a performance, it's a practice, and it only works when you're actually there.